He always exchanged words with everybody because it didn't matter what anybody was doing in and around the estate here and everywhere else. They all meant a lot to him, and he always took a very personal interest in everything that they were doing.
4 years, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, was the royal family's most reliable secret weapon. Not in the flashy, headline-grabbing sense, not through Netflix specials, magazine covers, or carefully orchestrated press tours, but through something far more powerful and far more rare inside the walls of the British monarchy: consistent, unshakable loyalty expressed through action rather than words. She was the woman who showed up. The woman who stayed. And now, in the spring of 2026, she is the woman who has allowed the cameras to look back at everything, and in doing so, has said more about Meghan Markle than any direct confrontation ever could. Because here is the truth about how Sophie operates. She doesn't do takedowns. She doesn't do press conferences dripping with barely concealed fury. She does something far more devastating. She lets the record speak. And right now, the record is deafening. The woman nobody saw coming. To understand what is unfolding right now, you have to go back to 1999. Sophie Rhys-Jones married Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, on June 19th of that year at Windsor Castle. At the time, the British tabloids didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. She was a commoner who had built a modest career in public relations, and the press treated her with a particular brand of gleeful cruelty it reserves for women who dare to marry into the House of Windsor without the shield of aristocratic lineage. Then, in 2001, came the incident that should have defined her. A tabloid sting operation, journalists posing as potential clients, caught Sophie on tape making comments about senior politicians that were perceived as inappropriate and politically embarrassing for the palace. It was the kind of scandal that ends careers and reputations. For Sophie, it turned out to be the beginning of something else entirely: her education. She didn't fight the press. She didn't go on a revenge tour. She and Prince Edward quietly retreated, reassessed, and rebuilt. Sophie gave up her public relations business and leaned into royal duties full-time. She became meticulous, discreet, and devoted, earning the trust of Queen Elizabeth II in a way that very few members of the extended family ever managed. Former Press Secretary Ailsa Anderson put it directly in the 2026 Channel 5 documentary Royal Peacemaker, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, which aired on May 16th. "I think the late Queen saw Sophie as a safe pair of hands, as she could always be relied on. Sophie was a true confidant for the Queen, which is quite rare in the royal world." A true confidant for the Queen. Let that sink in for a moment. Not just a loyal subject. Not just a reliable attendee at state functions. A confidant. The person you actually trust. This is the woman who later offered her hand in friendship to Meghan Markle, and received nothing in return. The mentorship that never was. The Channel 5 documentary Royal Peacemaker is careful, measured, and thoroughly reported. It does not set out to be a hit piece on anyone. It sets out to chronicle Sophie's remarkable rise within the monarchy, and in doing so, it inevitably illuminates the choices that others made by contrast. One of the documentary's most discussed revelations centers on what happened when Sophie extended the same offer of guidance to Meghan Markle that she had given to Kate Middleton years earlier. Royal commentator Emily Andrews stated plainly that Sophie was happy to act as a mentor for younger women marrying into the royal family. When she saw younger members marrying into the royal family, like Catherine Middleton and Meghan Markle, she was very happy to offer to be a mentor of sorts, Andrews said. Sophie had seen it all. She's been there and done that. What happened with Kate Middleton is now well documented. Royal correspondent Victoria Murphy described Sophie as a natural mentor for Kate in many ways, and observers have noted the way the relationship between the two women deepened over the years: quiet moments at state events, a steadying presence during some of the most scrutinized years of Kate's life as Princess of Wales. This is the Sophie effect in action: understated, unglamorous, and genuinely effective. But with Meghan, something different happened. According to an insider account reported by The Sun, Sophie and Meghan spent considerable time together one-on-one, with Sophie hosting Meghan at her home. The source described Meghan as having many questions and Sophie giving freely of her advice, understanding firsthand what it meant to navigate the transition from ordinary life to life inside the institution. Sophie even told Meghan she could call any time she needed help dealing with some of the more complicated dynamics within the family. Then nothing. No follow-up call. No return invitation to Frogmore Cottage, where Harry and Meghan were living. No text, no gesture, no acknowledgement that hours of genuine connection had taken place. The insider expressed surprise. Sophie, having opened her home and her experience, received silence. Now, to be entirely fair, and this is a point worth making clearly, Meghan's perspective on these early years has never been fully aired in this specific context. We have heard, through her own public statements and through the Netflix documentary series she made with Harry, that she found the institution isolating and that the support structures available to her were inadequate. It is possible that what Sophie perceived as an open door felt, from Meghan's vantage point, like something more conditional or complicated. Royal dynamics are rarely as clean as they appear from the outside. But here is the thing about Sophie's choice to allow this story to be told through a documentary watched by millions. She isn't making the argument herself. She is simply letting the facts of what she offered, and what happened next, stand in the public record. Oprah who? 8 words that told the whole story. If the mentorship chapter represents the private dimension of the rupture between Sophie and Meghan, then June 2021 gave the world the public one, and it came in the form of 8 extraordinary words. Earlier that year, on March 7th, Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a 2-hour interview broadcast on CBS that sent shockwaves around the world. The allegations were serious. Claims of a conversation about how dark their unborn son Archie's skin might be, assertions of inadequate mental health support, descriptions of isolation and institutional cruelty. It was one of the most watched and most analyzed television events in recent royal history, and the palace's formal response, recollections may vary, was itself instantly iconic in its studied ambiguity. Weeks later, Sophie and Prince Edward gave an interview of their own with the Daily Telegraph, notably their first joint interview since their wedding in 1999. When the journalist asked whether they had watched the Sussex Oprah interview, Edward quipped, "Oprah who?" Sophie followed immediately, "What interview?" 8 words. Said with a laugh. Apparently light, apparently breezy, apparently nothing. They were, in fact, a precise and deliberate message, and every royal watcher, every tabloid editor, and every palace insider understood exactly what was being communicated. We are not engaging with this. We are not taking it seriously. We are performing strategic ignorance of one of the most famous women on the planet to make a point about the people she interviewed. Sophie's team later insisted it was a joke. That may well be true in the technical sense. The best political communications always are. The joke is the cover. The message is the content. Omid Scobie, the royal biographer with documented closeness to the Sussexes and author of the 2023 book Endgame, Inside the Royal Family and the Monarchy's Fight for Survival, was not amused. He wrote that the remarks made them seem stuffy or tin-eared at best, and casually bigoted at worst, and framed the episode as further evidence of the monarchy's institutional failures. He used the phrase, Sophie's Oprah gaffe, and filed it as one entry in a longer catalogue of what he characterized as royal missteps. This is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because Sophie's response to being called casually bigoted in a major published book was, characteristically, not a tearful press conference. It was not a furious rebuttal statement. It was not a call to a sympathetic journalist. It was something far more Sophie. She went back to work. The fury behind the composure. Sources close to Sophie were clear to multiple outlets that she was not quietly stoic about Scobie's characterization. She was furious. The word used, consistently, by those who know her was not disappointed or frustrated, it was furious. And the reason is not difficult to understand when you consider the context. Sophie had spent the better part of 2 decades carefully, methodically rebuilding a reputation that had been damaged in the early 2000s. She had done this not through image management or strategic leaks, but through genuine, sustained commitment to her role. By the time Endgame was published in late 2023, Sophie had become one of the most trusted working royals in the institution, described in Sean Smith's 2025 biography Sophie, saving the royal family as nothing less than indispensable to the monarchy's functioning. To be described as casually bigoted in those circumstances was not just personally offensive. It was an attack on the work itself, on the decades of service that had elevated Sophie to her current standing. And it came from a source with obvious sympathies on one side of the Sussex divide, which made the characterization feel, to those in Sophie's circle, both unfair and deliberate. Scobie also claimed in Endgame that Sophie had deliberately cold-shouldered Meghan at the late Queen Elizabeth II state funeral in September 2022, one of the most watched events of the decade, and that both Queen Camilla and Kate Middleton had done the same. Sophie's team denied this. But the accusation had been made in print, for the world to read, and denial alone rarely quiets that kind of story. So Sophie did what Sophie does. She got more visible, not less. She took on more engagements, more diplomatic missions, more causes. She became, in the words of royal observers, a one-woman argument for the value of staying. The Edinburgh title, a symbolic reckoning. In March 2023, King Charles conferred the Dukedom of Edinburgh on his youngest brother Prince Edward as a birthday gift. Sophie became the Duchess of Edinburgh, the fifth woman ever to hold that title, following a line that includes Queen Elizabeth II herself and Queen Camilla. The significance of this title stretches far beyond ceremonial elevation. The Dukedom of Edinburgh was long associated with Prince Philip, who held it from 1947 until his death in 2021. After Philip died, the title merged with the crown before Charles chose to bestow it on Edward, a gift that honored both his late father's memory and his brother's decades of quiet service. Here is the detail that royal watchers immediately noted. This title was almost certainly the one Harry and Meghan would have received had they chosen to remain as senior working royals. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. That was a plausible trajectory for the Sussexes. Instead, after their departure in 2020, that path closed, and in 2023 it was walked by someone else entirely. The protocol consequences were immediate and, depending on your perspective, either deeply ironic or entirely fitting. Before the title change, royal etiquette required Sophie, then Countess of Wessex, to curtsy to Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, because Meghan's status as wife of a prince of the blood ranked above Sophie's as wife of an earl. The hierarchy of the monarchy, strange and arcane as it seems from the outside, was real and binding. After March 2023, that obligation evaporated. A friend of Sophie's told reporters what the Duchess privately felt about this development. The word used was relieved. The fuller quote, reported by Hello magazine and widely circulated, was pointed, "She no longer has to curtsy to someone in the family who has not only left royal duties but has spent the past 3 years criticizing the institution that Sophie works so hard to support." Relieved. Not triumphant, not gloating, relieved. As though something that had caused genuine discomfort had finally been lifted. The documentary that said everything without saying it. And so we arrive at Royal Peacemaker, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, which aired on Channel 5 on May 16, 2026. The title alone is a statement. In a family that has faced public allegations, explosive memoirs, lawsuits, and a fracture so severe that the heir to the throne and his brother barely speak, to call someone a peacemaker is to draw a clear line. There are those who fractured, the title implies, and there is someone who held things together. The documentary traces Sophie's journey from 1999 to the present day with care and considerable depth. It documents her mentorship of Kate Middleton, her diplomatic work, her global advocacy on sight loss through her role as ambassador for the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, and her evolution from a slightly uncertain newcomer to one of the most effective working members the monarchy has produced in a generation. But the section that generated the most headlines, and the most conversation, is the sequence that places the offer to Meghan in direct juxtaposition with what Sophie built with Kate. It does not accuse. It does not condemn. It does not offer editorial commentary about what Meghan's choice to decline the mentorship meant or says about her character. It simply presents two parallel stories, one in which an offer of guidance was accepted and a partnership flourished, and one in which an offer was made and never acknowledged. The viewer is left to draw their own conclusions. This is precisely the point. Royal commentators were quick to note the timing. Just days after the documentary aired, while Sophie was in Geneva speaking at the World Health Assembly in her capacity as Global Ambassador on Blindness Prevention, addressing health ministers and diplomats about avoidable sight loss across the developing world, Meghan Markle was also in Geneva for a separate appearance. Two women. Two very different platforms. The cameras were watching both. What the record actually shows. Here is what is important to say clearly, in the interest of fairness and accuracy. Meghan Markle's account of her time as a senior royal has never been fully matched against Sophie's. The two women have not sat across from each other in any documented public forum and compared notes. We are working, in large part, from accounts given to sympathetic sources on both sides of a deeply contested royal narrative. What is verifiable and documented is this: Sophie offered. The offer was not taken up. Sophie later made a remark about Oprah Winfrey that was read by many as calculated dismissal and by others as a genuine joke. She was subsequently described in print as casually bigoted, a characterization she disputed and found deeply offensive. She was accused of snubbing Meghan at the Queen's funeral, an accusation her team denied. And she has, through all of it, continued to serve, to work, to show up. What is also verifiable is that Sophie's standing within the institution has never been higher. King Charles reportedly leans on her heavily. Her friendship with Kate Middleton, now Princess of Wales, is one of the most quietly powerful alliances in the modern monarchy. She carries the Edinburgh title with a weight that comes not from inheritance but from something she built herself, over years, through choices that were often unglamorous and frequently unnoticed. Sean Smith's 2025 biography Sophie, Saving the Royal Family, makes the argument explicitly in its title. Others, less sympathetic to the institution, would frame the same facts differently. But the facts themselves are not really in dispute. What it means when the quiet one speaks. There is a particular kind of power that belongs to people who are known for their restraint. When someone who always deflects finally allows a moment of candor, even through the medium of a documentary, even through the careful architecture of other people's words, the effect is seismic precisely because it is so unexpected. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has spent years being described as the royal family's secret weapon, a phrase that appears in biographies, documentaries, and profiles with almost comic consistency. The secret weapon works because it remains secret. It works because it doesn't announce itself. It works because when everyone else is making noise, the weapon is quietly loading. The Channel 5 documentary is not loud. It is not angry. It does not thunder. But it is, without question, a reckoning. It places on record, for the viewing public of Britain and beyond, a clear and detailed account of what Sophie offered, what happened, and what Sophie built in the years that followed. It celebrates her as a peacemaker at the precise historical moment when the peace she helped preserve is most visible by contrast with the alternatives. For Meghan Markle, who has spent years carefully curating her own narrative through Netflix, podcasts, memoirs, and brand partnerships, the existence of this documentary is a different kind of challenge than anything the tabloids have thrown at her. It is not cruel. It is not sensationalized. It is something harder to argue with, a straightforward account of choices made and their consequences, told by the people who were there. Sophie didn't call a press conference. She didn't write a book. She didn't go on a podcast. She became the Duchess of Edinburgh, she spoke at the World Health Assembly, and she let Channel 5 tell the story. In the language of the British monarchy, where everything is subtext and every gesture is communication, that is about as savage as it gets. The lasting question. There is something genuinely worth sitting with in all of this, beyond the surface drama of royal politics. Sophie's story is, at its core, a story about what happens when you choose to stay, to absorb difficulty without becoming defined by it, and to build trust slowly and unglamorously over decades. It is not a story for everyone. Not every person who married into a complex institution and found it wanting should have stayed. Not every departure is a failure of commitment. Meghan Markle made her choices, has built something real with her life outside the institution, and she has not been shy about explaining why those choices were necessary for her own survival. But Sophie also made her choices. She stayed when it was hard. She worked when no one was watching. She offered friendship and received silence, offered mentorship and was not called back, and continued anyway, not with bitterness or martyrdom, but with what appears to be genuine belief in the value of what she was doing. The documentary gave those choices an audience. And the audience, judging by the coverage and conversation that followed its May 2026 broadcast, received the message clearly. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has finally broken her silence. She did it the way she does everything, quietly, precisely, and with devastating effect.